and with that, I believe we'll get into the round. So, with 8 minutes on the clock, we'll begin. In the late 1970s, the federal government believed that it would be of the utmost benefit to the economy and environment if private producers developed new synthetic fuels. But the government could not directly force these companies to produce these fuels, so instead the government incentivized them by actually co-signing loans for these companies. This meant that in the occasion of corporate bankruptcy or loan default, the government would cover the difference. That is precisely what happened, and the government was forced to pay billions of dollars to cover these ill-contrived loans. Currently, there's a federal program to give these same type of loan guarantees to energy production and distribution companies. But as was the case with synthetic fuels, this policy is setting the government up for a major windfall in which taxpayers will have to foot the bill for billions of dollars in fiscally irresponsible loan guarantees. Therefore, we are resolved that the United States federal government should substantially reform its energy policy. To begin, let's define what a loan guarantee is. Taxpayers for Common Sense in September of 2012 wrote that, quote, federal loan guarantees allow borrowers to receive a privately financed loan with the federal government assuming the risk. Put simply, a loan guarantee provides its recipient with the backing of the U.S. Treasury if their privately financed loan defaults. In the case of the DOE Loan Guarantee Program, the federal government can take responsibility for up to 80% of a qualified energy project's cost, unquote. With that, let's move on to the goal of this round in regard to loan guarantees, that is economic responsibility. Our thesis and goal, economic responsibility. My partner and I believe that our government must be responsible with taxpayers' dollars. That is why we believe that economic responsibility should be used to judge this round. Now let's move to the first fact of the current system. Fact 1, billions in guarantee authority. Billions in guarantee authority. The DOE Loan Programs Office Annual Portfolio Status Report for fiscal year 2019 said, quote, up to $24 billion is provided for the Title 17 Innovative Energy Loan Guarantee Program. That's the loan guarantee program of the Department of Energy. This program has guaranteed loans and lost billions of taxpayer dollars before. This is a very unwise policy, which is demonstrated in no better way than through Fact 2, history. That is Fact 2, history. Taxpayers for Common Sense, a policy education center, wrote on December 8th of 2010 that, quote, a loan guarantee program of this size and structure already puts the federal government at significant economic risk. The Department of Energy and its one previous test case ended with taxpayers paying a heavy price. The federal government was forced to pay billions to cover the losses. The current loan guarantees, much like the synthetic fuels loan guarantees, are slated to provide guarantees to financially risky industries, many of which have received billions of dollars in past subsidies, unquote. Loan guarantee manipulation has been tried before. The program failed dismally then, and this quote-unquote new program is following the same path. As we can see through Harm 1, billions wasted. Harm 1, billions wasted. Congressman Randy Weber, leading a congressional hearing about the program on February 15, 2017, said, quote, it is clear that the DOE Loan Guarantee Program is expensive. The Government Accountability Office estimates that the cost for the current loan guarantees is $2.2 billion, with a B. Supporters argue the cost is justified if we can help innovative technologies make the leap to the commercial market. But what if federal meddling in the market actually hurts innovation, unquote. This statement brings us directly to our second harm, under which there are two subpoints. That is Harm 2, guaranteed loans guarantee failure. Guaranteed loans guarantee failure. And our first subpoint under that is that guaranteed loans distort the market. You can tag this as distorts market. Congressman Weber, chairman on the Congressional Subcommittee on Energy, wrote in 2017 that, quote, taxpayers often end up paying higher prices for their power because of federal government meddling in the energy market. For example, when the DOE provided a $1.6 billion loan guarantee to the Ivanpah Solar Project in California, the ratepayers in Southern California will now pay 2 to 5 times more for power generated by this facility, in addition to being stuck with the bill if the project goes into default. The truth is that when the DOE provides loan guarantees, there is no benefit for the taxpayer, even if the guaranteed loan is paid in full. Regular Americans take on the liability of the full loan. They don't see a return and can end up paying more for their electricity if and when the project is actually built." Unquote. And this brings us to subpoint B, removes incentive to innovate. Removes incentive to innovate. PhD Veronica DeRugi, a researcher focusing on the U.S. economy and the federal budget, pointed out in congressional testimony that, quote, "the problems with loan guarantees are much more fundamental than the cost of one or more failed projects. In fact, the economic literature shows that every loan guarantee program transfers the risk from lenders to taxpayers, is likely to inhibit innovation, and increases the overall cost of borrowing." Unquote. Loan guarantees not only remove the risk in failure, they also remove the need for success. Why must private people be made to pay through taxes for the failed private companies which only need guarantees because private investors already deemed them too risky for investment in the first place? Considering the past, the present, and even the ideals, there is simply no economic reason for federal loan guarantees. Therefore, we propose the following plan. Mandate. Cancel all remaining DOE loan guarantee authority under Title 17 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. The Department of Energy will no longer give out loan guarantees. Our agency and enforcement are Congress, the U.S. Treasury, the Department of Energy, and applicable governmental agencies. In regard to funding, the plan is purely legislative, but any incidental fees will be paid out of the DOE general budget, and remaining loan guarantee authority will be redirected to the DOE's loan programs. Timeline. Immediately upon an affirmative ballot, no more DOE loan guarantees will be given out. This leads to two advantages. Advantage 1, save money. Very simply, save money. By abolishing this fiscally irresponsible program that gambles our tax dollars, whether we like it or not, on risky companies, taxpayers' dollars will no longer go to waste. This directly upholds our thesis of fiscal responsibility. This brings us to Advantage 2, innovation protected. Advantage 2, innovation protected. Without loan guarantees by the government, alternative energy companies will need to actually make a competitive product and convince private investors to invest their money. This will result in better technology and ultimately better prices for consumers. Alternative energy companies already have access to billions of dollars from the private market. There's no need for the government to be involved, using our tax dollars to pay the failed, risky companies, which we in the free market decided not to invest in from the beginning. An affirmative ballot will ensure that taxpayer dollars are no longer wasted. Thank you very much for your time. I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Okay, getting my timer out. Okay, so I'm going to start off my timer. Okay, so I'm hoping you are doing well today, and congrats again. I'm going to start off by asking you some questions. The first question I'd like to ask is, would you agree that alternative energy sources are better and more environmentally safe compared to fossil fuels?
Perhaps they are, yes.
Okay. Should a policy ever aim to significantly harm small businesses?
No.
Can you tell me a little bit about what a synthetic energy is? Because you mentioned them quite a couple times in your speech.
Well, that was specifically in regard to synthetic fuels. And synthetic fuels, the government believed were a good proposition and that the economy needed them. So they decided to give out loan guarantees for these. The problem with loan guarantees is that it only pays out if a company fails. They benefit no one. And they tried to benefit synthetic fuels. They actually lost billions of dollars and helped no one.
Okay. One of my last questions for you today is, when did this organization start? Meaning, when did loan guarantees for alternative energy start?
That was in the late 1970s and early 1980s when the first synthetic fuels loan guarantees were given out by the DOE.
Right. Okay. I have no more questions for you today. Thank you. Oh, actually, I have one more. Sorry.
Right.
So you're saying that we're ending all loan guarantees to alternative energy companies?
Yes, ending all Department of Energy loan guarantees to alternative energy companies. That is ending all loan guarantees from the DOE.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, for reference, this is Elijah Sirilan. This is going to be an 8-minute first negative constructive. If my microphone ever cuts out or anything, just let me know, write it in the chat box, and I'll try to address it as fast as I possibly can. All right, without further ado, I'm going to assume everyone's ready, and let's begin. Now, the other day I was lying in my bed and I thought, how can I run 858 miles to Fayetteville, Georgia to see someone special? And this made me remind something about marathon runners. Now, these marathon runners are very prestigious athletes who can run a straight 26 miles without stopping a little over 2 hours. I think that's honestly an amazing feat. But what's interesting is the only reason why they're able to do this is because they supplement their body with good nutrition, have a high regiment of training programs, and eat really good food. See, loan guarantees actually do this to the United States of America. It is the negative's contention that loan guarantees actually help alternative energy companies keep in the long run, stay fit, stay safe, and keep going on for as long as they economically can. It is our contention that we're going to bring up two significant stock issues. But first, I want to talk about what the goal of the affirmative team is. Essentially, what is the decision in American policy making? And the negative team stands for a value of net benefits. Net benefits. Irregardless of whether we accept the affirmative team's value of economic feasibility, we need to see if their system is actually more advantageous than disadvantageous. If any system provides more disadvantages than advantages, or whether those disadvantages largely outweigh those advantages, then it's a system that should never ever be passed. We need to make smart policy decisions that is going to make America better tomorrow than it was yesterday. Now, the first one I want to talk about are two significant stock issues. First, I'm going to be diving straight into the big disadvantage of the affirmative team and how smaller businesses are simply bound to go under if we ban this policy. In cross-examination, my opponent specifically said we should never have a policy that aims to harm small businesses. Well, this policy does that. Then I'm going to be diving straight into significance, essentially saying why loan guarantees are inherently good for alternative energy companies and why getting rid of them would be detrimental to the economic and environmental success of our country. In Haley's speech, she will be diving into a bunch of disadvantages, essentially proving the net benefit point for the negative team and saying why this is a disadvantageous system. But the first point I would like to talk about is actually a significant disadvantage in the status quo. Now, my opponent talked about private lenders in one of his harms, and he talked about how they agree, or these investors rather, agree that it is a risky investment to have these loan guarantees to alternative energy companies. Well, that's the issue here, because if we're looking at smaller businesses, they will be harmed. Smaller businesses will be harmed. And this is a couple of big issues that we want to look in today. See, some smaller businesses that actually rely on these loan guarantees for their own alternative energy companies will go out of business if we simply rip it up out of the air. Now that they don't have their crutch or their reliance, which helps them in the game of alternative energy, they are down to die out. Now, the first point I'd like to talk about is that these private lenders are typically unable to finance these types of projects. Private lenders are typically unable to finance these types of projects. As according to Congressman Eddie Bernice Johnson in February 2017, says, quote, that the DOE's loan support is critical because private lenders are typically willing or unable to take the risks associated with financing truly innovative, first-of-a-kind projects that scale on their own. But this leads to the next point, because as of the status quo, the government is covering for the private lenders that are unwilling and unable to finance these types of projects. You can tag this as the government fills the gap. The government fills the gap. As according to Jake Caldwell and Richard R. Caperton on June of 2010 says, quote, that companies on the demonstration and commercialization stages have unique financing that are not currently being met. These companies are typically riskier than mature companies, so traditional private debt will not meet their needs. And they also have large amounts of money, so venture capital financing is insufficient. The government creates instruments that fills this gap by enabling large investments to these companies, either by providing direct support, such as direct loans or loan guarantees, unquote. We can clearly see that these alternative energy companies are inherently more risky, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fund them. These smaller businesses will go out of business if we don't stick to the status quo. This leads to the impact of this argument, that if companies can't get this gap filled, companies have the potential to die. Companies have a significant potential to die. From the same article, they say, quote, that these clean technology companies' inability to secure loans and capital make the leap from pilot phase to commercial deployment, or the so-called valley of death, which is a major contributor to success or failure in the clean energy industry. And the overall competitiveness of the United States energy sector. Only 5 of the top 30 companies producing solar energy components, wind turbines, and advanced batteries were United States-based companies in 2009. We can clearly see from this piece of evidence that companies are bound to die out from this gap. The affirmative team is only making that gap bigger, but the status quo is funding these companies and allowing them to stay afloat as long as our system is in place. By ripping the affirmative system into the air, we are harming our own businesses. And in cross-examination, our opponents even agreed to this when they said we should never have a policy that harms our small businesses intentionally. This leads to the next point, and I would like to talk about significance. Significance, essentially how our current policy is working extremely well in the status quo. My first point is that loan guarantees offer a massive economic growth. Loan guarantees offer massive economic growth. In fact, Energy Future Initiatives on March 2018 agrees with this claim because they actually ran a study that found that loan guarantees have generated more than $2 billion in interest payments for taxpayers, and is also projected to bring in an extra $5 billion. They say, quote, that LPO manages a profile that rounds about $32 billion in loans and loan guarantees, which leverages $20 billion in private equity investments to create a total project portfolio totaling $50 billion. With the constructive of almost all LPO projects completed, the major portfolio loans are currently in the repayment period. LPO's portfolio generated almost $2 billion in interest payments to American taxpayers, and this program is expected to bring over $5 billion in the course of those investments, unquote. But not only are we benefiting from the status quo from interest payments, which is a whopping $2 billion, but these loans have saved jobs. The specific number that Haley and I are going to quote is 56,000 jobs created and saved. 56,000 jobs created and saved. As according to the executive director of management consultant firm Bear Studios LLC, Lexi Jackson, says on August 1st of 2019, saying, quote, that LPO projects have transformed American energy infrastructure and accelerated growth in clean energy and energy vehicle markets. LPO projects have created and saved over 56,000 American jobs across all regions of the country and have generated over $50 billion in total job investment. Now, the next point I wanted to talk about is not only do we see a clear growth in jobs that have been created and saved, but also that interest payments have been saved as well, but that our system is good for the environment. Our system is good for the environment. Lexi Jackson, again, who was the executive director of management consultant firm Bear Studios LLC, actually found that LPO projects have significantly reduced emissions and saved billions of gallons of gasoline. She says, quote, that LPO projects have prevented 34.7 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions and saved 1.7 billion gallons of gasoline and counting, unquote. But this isn't the only energy policy that actually saves our environment, but also it is the same one that reduces millions of tons of emissions and has increased production of clean energy. In fact, the Energy Future Initiatives even quote on this comment, saying that the total economic and societal benefits of the program are significantly larger. To date, the $50 billion in total investment projects have created or saved 56,000 American jobs. But in addition to these metrics, as of December of 2016, LPO projects have resulted in saving 1.47 million metric tons of avoided CO2 emissions to clean power energy, unquote. This saves our environment and this saves our economy. This system needs to be in place because we need something that simply supplements our economy and our businesses while also protecting our environment. This is that incentive. Thank you. And I'm now staying open for any questions that my opponent may have.
All right, I'm assuming everyone can hear me, and just let me know if you cannot. That was a great speech, Elijah. I'll just start off.
Yeah, for sure.
First, I have a couple of questions about your significance point. You said under your significance point that the Loan Programs Office has generated all of this revenue from interest up to $2 billion. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. And while also saving 56,000 jobs in the long run.
All right. Could we see that evidence? Could you send that over? And while you're at it, what does that evidence refer to? Does it refer to interest payments from loans or loan guarantees?
I can double check the evidence, but if you want to move on to your next question while I'm doing that, feel free to.
Of course, and we will address this in the next speech, so...
Okay.
We'll move on from that to the second point under significance. You said that jobs were created and saved by the Loan Programs Office. First, as a background, do you understand what a loan guarantee is?
Yeah, I believe you read a definition in your first affirmative constructive.
All right. Do you understand the difference between a loan guarantee and a loan?
Yeah, like you said in cross-sex, if these companies do go down under, the government will take care of it. That's correct?
Yes. Do you understand that there is nothing more done by a loan guarantee except that function? If a company goes bankrupt, then they are bailed out, essentially.
Sure, but these projects have actually been able to save over 56,000 American jobs, as well as
Yes.
create $50 billion in revenue, which answers your question before, and an extra $2 billion in
Yes.
interest payments for taxpayers.
Yes, of course. The interest payments, the jobs, all created by companies that survived. Is that correct?
I'm not sure with a specific piece of evidence, but if you have something to
Well,
refute that.
can we agree on a common sense basis that a company that is alive, a company that is not bankrupt, is the only one which can create jobs and pay interest payments? Is that correct?
Sure.
All right, so upon that basis, we see that loan guarantees only pay a company if it goes bankrupt, only bail it out if it goes bankrupt and dissolves itself. What does a loan guarantee have to do with this? And this was in regard to loans interest payments. Is that correct?
Sure.
Do loan guarantees essentially have anything to do with that evidence?
Which specific piece of evidence are you referring to?
All of the evidence that you read under your significance point, that with the environment and the creation of jobs and the creation of interest payments, can you prove any correlation between loan guarantees and those, or only loans?
Oh, yeah, sure. I can bring up a definite correlation. They're 100% related, and I can address that in a further speech.
So why do you believe that loan guarantees, which only pay a company if it fails, have anything to do with the companies that are still alive? Have the loan guarantees ever done anything for those companies?
Well, I mean, in a common sense basis, if we're arguing from the logic that you're looking at, I wouldn't say so. But we do have a substantial amount of evidence talking about loan guarantees specifically generating these dollars in revenue and tax investments.
All right, we will, of course, address that and explain the difference in our following speeches. I see we're out of time. Thank you for your answers.
The affirmative will take no preparation time. All right. Then I'm going to assume everybody's ready and go ahead and get started. Let me tell you a fictional story to illustrate the affirmative side. It is the story of little Antonio Garibaldi, but we can call him Tony. When he was 14 months old, he started to learn how to walk, and he took his first step, wobbled a little bit, and fell back hard on his backside and began to cry. Now, his parents understood that in his learning to walk, there was the risk of falling, and they deemed that because of that risk, little Tony deserved no risk at all. So they went out and they bought him a cute little wheelchair that he could ride around in, until they reasoned he was strong enough and old enough to be able to walk without the risk of falling. So little Antonio, as he grew, every year received a wheelchair, slightly bigger than the last, until his 12th birthday when something changed. On his 12th birthday, he received a bicycle instead. And when he asked, "What's this?" his parents told him, "We think that now you're strong enough and ready to walk." So after trying to convince him a little while, he finally decided that he would try. And Tony took a single step, wobbled a little bit, and fell down hard on his backside. Because the fact is, when industries or children grow up in such a protected environment, they're unable to stand on their own 2 feet when they truly must. In this, the second affirmative speech of the round, what I will be doing is really just working my way down the flow and responding to all the points brought up in the last speech, and then still examine why the current system is so full of harms. So let's jump right in at the very top, that of the goal of net benefits. In his last speech, Elijah stated that we should be looking at whichever side provides the most net benefits. However, it is the contention of the affirmative team today that that is exactly what we are doing. We are saying whichever side can show that it will be best for the economic well-being of the United States ought to merit your ballot. Whichever provides the most net economic benefits merits your ballot today. So ultimately, the goals of both sides are the same. Now, moving on from that point, let's address the disadvantage that he proposed in the last speech. Let's look specifically at that of smaller businesses being harmed. Smaller businesses being harmed. And I want to clarify something here really quickly. We are not saying that the federal government will no longer honor any pre-existing loan guarantees. If we were to be saying that, then our plan would be illegal, for those loan guarantees are contractually bound. These small businesses that are relying on already existing loan guarantees will not be harmed in any way, because we are not pulling out the support from underneath them. Because, once again, that would be illegal, and violation of United States federal government contracts. What we are saying is we will no longer give out any more loan guarantees. And this is very critical in today's debate round. So moving on from that, let's examine the claims that the loan support fills gaps and that the government support fills the gaps. Let's just clarify something right here, and it's something that is crucial in today's debate round. There is a very large difference between a loan and a loan guarantee. A loan is when the government will directly lend money to small businesses. And in this case, the government has safeguards in place. For example, they will accept collateral in repayment of the loans if the company defaults, and they require down payments, and they make money from interest payments. In a loan, the federal government is not at a substantial economic risk, but they are still supporting these new businesses. They're still supporting these fledgling industries. However, a loan guarantee is when the federal government vouches to pay back a company's loan, a privately financed loan, meaning that the only way that the government pays out money is if the company defaults. And the only way they gain money is through no means. Essentially, in a loan guarantee, best case scenario, the government gains nothing. Worst case scenario, they're on the hook for billions of dollars. Ultimately, the affirmative has no contention for the loan program, the Department of Energy loan program. In fact, we are adding $24 billion to the Department of Energy loan program through diverting of the loan guarantee authority. What we are not saying is that the loan program is faulted in any way. What we are saying is that the loan guarantee program shows substantial harm in the current system, and that is what we are repealing. Once again, when we look at the evidence that our opponent presented discussing the valley of death and how government aid is crucial, there are two responses. First, we are still aiding. We are lending government aid through the source of loans, through the form of loans to these companies in which the government is at a highly, substantially less economic risk. But secondly, the evidence that he used to make that point was from the year 2010, stating that there was not enough venture capital in the United States. However, as of 2018, we find that the total amount of venture capital in the United States is close to $100 billion. This is published by Statista, a research company, in 2019. They write, quote, venture capital is defined as temporary equity investment in young, innovative, non-listed companies that stand out on the market, although the companies lack the current earning power. In 2018, the value of venture capital investments in the United States amounted to approximately 99.5 billion US dollars, end quote. An example is the Warren Buffett's investment firm, Berkshire Hathaway, which invested up to $17 billion in renewable energy sources. The fact is, currently there is plenty of investment in green energy, in renewable energy, and the government will still be lending loans. All we are saying is we should stop this loan guarantee program, which actually brings us into the direct response to the significant point that our opponent presented. He says that there is massive economic growth, but let's look at that economic growth. First of all, let's examine the number $2 billion in interest payment. And this is quite a staggering number that almost completely offsets the amount lost due to the loan guarantee program. However, when we look at that number, we see that it is $2 billion in interest payments. But wait a minute, the government doesn't get any interest payments off of loan guarantees. No, if you examine that evidence and actually all the evidence that our opponent presented, it is discussing the loan program office as a whole. Interest payments come from the direct loans from the Department of Energy Loan Program Office. And once again, we believe that this is a highly successful system, bringing in $2 billion and is projected to bring in $5 billion in the course of the next few years. We believe that the Loan Program Office is doing a great job with their loan portfolio. However, when we look at their loan guarantee portfolio, we see that it has still cost $2.2 billion. Once again, the millions of tons of carbon dioxide that was removed from the atmosphere and the 56,000 jobs created, those were in response to the loan program office as a whole. And when we go to the loan program office loan guarantee portfolio, which we can provide if the negative would like to see it, we find that the amount of permanent jobs created is 593. 593 permanent jobs created at the price of $2.2 billion. But there's another harm that our opponents have completely failed to examine, and that is the harm of innovation. Innovation has actually been harmed through this program. Why? Well, very similar to little Antonio. You see, when we give them these loan guarantees, we are providing them a crutch, we are providing them a wheelchair, and they never have to truly grow. Our own opponent said it himself in the last speech, that when we remove this crutch, the companies are not able to stand. And he said that harms small businesses. But likewise, that actually harms our economy in the long run because it harms innovation. When these loan guarantees finally do expire for these companies, when they find they have to pay them back, they will be harmed in the long run. Thank you, and I now stand ready for cross-examination.
Okay, I'm muting.
All right, this is Elijah Sirilan. This is going to be a 3-minute cross-examination. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, then let's begin. Now, I do have a couple of questions. I just want to make something clear. We can both agree that the affirmative and the negative team are achieving a standard of net benefits. Is that correct?
Net economic benefits, yes.
Net economic benefits. So are we excluding anything else that's not economic?
We're not excluding anything else, but this entire policy is very economically oriented. Thus, we must look at what is best for the economics of the United States as a whole. And that does include jobs produced, jobs provided, and as well as the amount of money lost through different programs, etc.
Okay, so as long as the negative team can simply prove that your plan is more disadvantageous, it's a negative ballot. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, let's move on to the next point. Now, I want to talk a little about something interesting. There's a difference between interest payments and revenue. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, what percent of loans are loan guarantees as according to the LPO?
Well, according to the LPO, 0% of loans are loan guarantees that are coming from the government, because loans and loan guarantees are very different. The government will not give out a loan and a loan guarantee to the same company.
Right, but the percentage, how many loan guarantees are there? That's what I'm asking. What's the percentage of loan guarantees in the status quo?
The percentage of loan guarantees compared to direct loans from the loan program office, not entirely sure on those exact numbers as we don't have the entire loan portfolio, However, there are approximately 30 different companies in the loan guarantee portfolio.
30 projects over 18 states, is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, we can actually look into that evidence later. Now, another point I want to talk about is just going back to the entire thesis. You would still agree that if small companies are being intentionally harmed by a policy, that's a policy that shouldn't be passed. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, because once again, we must look at it through the lens of net benefits. If we would be harming 3 small companies, but in doing so, save American taxpayers $2.2 billion, then there's definitely some weighing mechanism that we have to have in place.
Okay, is your plan timeline immediately?
Our timeline is immediately.
So as soon as the judge clicks the little box that says affirmative, this plan will be passed. There will be no more loan guarantees, and all standing loan guarantees to companies who are currently using them will no longer be given out. Is that correct?
Incorrect. We're not saying that companies that are currently using loan guarantees would not be receiving them. Let's explain a little bit how loan guarantees work.
Actually, I'd like to move on to another question, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Another one I want to talk about is, what is your statistic about the 590 jobs being created?
Yes, that was actually compiled by going and looking at the entire loan guarantee portfolio and adding up the entire amount of permanent jobs that they proposed would be created.
What was the date?
The date, I believe, was no date was given. However, it is discussing the entirety of each individual project that they look at.
From what year, though?
I believe it was when these programs were first started, so the year 2011.
Okay, 2011. Thank you.
The negative team will be taking prep time starting at 5 minutes. Starting now. We have the remaining 3:40 for prep left. Okay, starting my timer for the 8 minutes each. Okay. When Elsa finally unleashed all of her powers, she not only affected the economy, but also the environment. Just like Elsa and all of the issues she caused, ending loan guarantees for alternative energy companies would have the same effect. My partner Eli will be responding to the 2AC in his next speech, but for mine, I'm going to be listing 5 significant advantages that will happen by ending loan guarantees for alternative energy companies. So let's start with my first disadvantage. You can write this down as economy harmed, risking a lot of jobs. Economy harmed, risking a lot of jobs. Loan guarantees have created 56,000 jobs and reduced 34 million tons of CO2. Congressman Mark Vesey, in a joint hearing before the Subcommittee on Energy and Subcommittee on Oversight Committee on Science, Space, and Tech on February 15th, 2017, states that the LPO Loan Programs Office portfolio has over 30 projects in 18 states. It has enabled over $50 billion in private sector investments in clean energy technologies. These loan guarantees have created 56,000 American jobs across the country. And these loan guarantees have helped prevent the release of 34.1 million tons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. Now, we can see that contrary to what the affirmative team might make you think, but the loan guarantees by the DOE have actually created jobs and have sufficiently reduced emissions of CO2. People need jobs, and by getting rid of these loans, 56,000 people will be losing their jobs. The second disadvantage is the affirmative team plan slows transition to alternative energies. The affirmative team plan slows transition to alternative energies. Loans help create industries. Example of loan guarantees creating new industries is by BV Solar. Congressman Mark Vesey, in a joint hearing before the Subcommittee on Energy and Subcommittee on Oversight Committee on Science, Space, and Tech on February 15th, 2017, states that the Section 1705 loan guarantees are responsible for launching the utility-scale photovoltaic (PV) solar industry. These loan guarantees enable the first 5 100-megawatt solar PV facilities to build in the U.S. What followed the initial investment from DOE perfectly illustrates the role that these loan guarantees fill the market. Clearly, these loan guarantees help create new industries. A negative ballot will ensure that many new and beneficial technologies cannot make progress. We are slowing this down without loan guarantees. That is the point for the affirmative team, that they are slowing down the loans without guarantees. Now, the third disadvantage is environment harmed. Point A states that the environment is better protected under an alternative energy source. Acting President for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute, Christopher Guth, in May 2011, states that while reliable and affordable energy raises society's standard of living, methods of energy production often incur environmental costs not naturally priced by the free market, and these costs are not always integrated into the cost of energy production. The environmental costs of clean energy technologies are in many cases lower than the cost of conventional energy sources. Now, passing an affirmative ballot will hurt our alternative energy market, and this will result in a continued harm to the environment, as I've just stated. Now, the second thing I'd like to share in this point is that offshore oil/gas drilling leads to spills. The lack of incentive to use alternative energy sources. Now, the UN Concerned Scientist says on August 30th, 2016, that in 2010, an explosion at the Deepwater Horizon offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico killed 11 workers and led to the release of approximately 4.9 billion barrels of oil over 87 days. The accident was unique in terms of its scale, but environmental and safety incidents are common in the offshore oil and gas industries. Between 2008 and 2012, offshore drilling rigs experienced 34 fatalities, 1,436 injuries, and 60 oil spills of more than 50 barrels each. Now, oil drilling in the ocean leads to oil spills in the ocean. According to this piece of evidence, in just 4 years, there were 60 oil spills, or 15 per year. Also, costs are being affected by the status quo because we have found a study by a Harvard study that surface coal mining costs approximately $74.6 billion every year to the U.S. A Harvard study shows that surface coal mining costs approximately $74.6 billion every year to the U.S. The Union Concerned Scientists say on August 30, 2016, that a Harvard University study was assessed the life cycle coal and public health effects of coal from 1997 to 2005 found a link to lung, cardiovascular, and kidney diseases, such as diabetes and hypertension, and an elevated occurrence of low birth rate and preterm birth associated with surface mining practices. The total cost, an estimated $74.6 billion every year. Now, we can see that the impact from this is that an affirmative ballot means continued health and financial costs for many Americans. Now, I'd like to talk about my fourth disadvantage, which is workers are harmed. Workers are harmed. Now, coal mining leads to black lung disease for coal miners, and 10,000 former miners died between 1990 and 2000. The Union of Concerned Scientists say again on August 30th, 2016, that in addition to job site accidents, coal mining can lead to chronic health disorders. Black lung disease continues to be a common ailment among coal miners. Now, again, approximately 10,000 former miners between 1990 and 2000 are still being harmed. Now, I'd like to dive into my fifth advantage. Abolishing loan guarantees will lead to energy dependence on foreign companies. Abolishing loan guarantees will lead to energy dependence on foreign companies. Now, alternative energy reduces oil dependence on foreign countries. Acting president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute, Christopher Guth, in May 21st, 2011, states that mitigating exposure to oil market volatility requires energy resource diversification and the availability of ready oil substitutes. While such mitigation presents strong benefits to society at large, the downside risk of low prices impacts alternative energy producers. Alternative energy reduce oil dependence and price volatility by harnessing domestic resources such as natural gas, electricity, advanced biofuels, and coal. Now, the impact we see is that an affirmative ballot means greater dependence on other countries for energy. Nearly a third of the petroleum we import is from OPEC. Now, the Energy Information Administration states in 2018 that stated this, that nearly a third of the petroleum we import is from OPEC. And I have a chart that shows how it's affecting the countries. Now, the gross imports is 2.89%, which is 2.89, which is 29%. Now, the impacts we see, judges, are nearly a third of the petroleum we import from OPEC is a self-proclaimed oil cartel. Our net imports with them are nearly 2.6 million barrels of petroleum a day. Passing an affirmative ballot will increase our dependence on groups like OPEC. As we can see, there are more disadvantages to ending loan guarantees for alternative energy companies than advantages, and how removing them is actually causing more harm to both the economy and the environment. And this is why I vote for a negative ballot. And I stand open to any questions my opponents may have.
All right. Just go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Hello, Haley. First of all, congratulations on making it to the semifinals round.
Thank you.
All right, I have a few questions for you today about your last speech. Let's jump right in with your very first disadvantage, that of economy harmed. And you discussed those 56,000 jobs that had been created.
Correct.
Did you provide any numbers on how many of those jobs were permanent jobs compared to how many were temporary, construction, transport, etc.?
Actually, Eli will be discussing that in his next speech.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. Now, moving on, really in response to your second through fifth disadvantage, are you aware that under the affirmative plan, we are still keeping government loans to aid green energy companies?
Yes, I am aware.
All right, so has the negative really shown a direct correlation between us ending these loan guarantees, diverting those funds into a direct loan portfolio or direct loan availability, to harming United States renewable energy?
I believe we have, and if you guys need further evidence on that, Eli will be discussing that.
All right, that would be great as well. Now, moving on specifically, can you just explain in your own words how making $24 billion available in loans to renewable energy companies is going to drastically hurt our renewable energy companies?
Can you repeat that one more time for me? Sorry.
Yes, could you please explain to me how making $24 billion available in direct loans for renewable energy companies is going to harm United States renewable energy companies?
So you're asking if by giving it to these companies, how it will affect the United States, correct?
Yes, essentially, how diverting the money from the loan guarantee authority to loan authority is going to harm our renewable energy companies.
So it's basically gonna harm them by if you're transferring it, it's actually gonna make it a little more difficult in order for them to actually use it. And nearly a third, like I said, is petroleum. And if we import it from the OPC or other companies, then basically by passing your plan, it will increase our dependence on other groups.
All right, it would be great if you could show how specifically ending loan guarantees would directly lead to more independence on foreign oil. Now,
Right.
moving back to those 56,000 jobs you were discussing, you claim that we'd be losing all 56,000 of those jobs. Is that correct?
Not exactly.
All right. Are you aware that most of those jobs have already ended as they were merely temporary jobs?
Repeat that, sorry.
Are you aware that most of those jobs have already been ended since they were merely temporary jobs?
No, I wasn't aware.
All right, thank you. It appears we're out of time.
All right, the negative team's not going to be taking any prep time. This is Elijah Sirilan for reference. This is going to be a 5-minute first negative constructive. And let's begin. Now, in my last speech of the day, I just want to remind the judges of one specific goal in today's debate round that we can never overlook. And that is the value of the purpose of American policymaking, that we ought to make tomorrow a better day than it is yesterday. And I believe that Haley proved with substantial amount of disadvantages that both applied to the economic and environmental fields of our American policy, that passing the affirmative team's plan would be detrimental to our American system. Now, today, I'm going to be talking about a couple of points that was brought up by my opponent in his second affirmative constructive because he actually contradicted himself a couple of times regarding evidence. Now, the first point I would like to talk about is an agreement in cross-examination. An agreement in cross-examination. I brought up a question of talking about how many of these projects were loan guarantee projects. But the evidence that we brought up in Haley's last disadvantage was actually referring to that. Congressman Reich VC, in a joint hearing against the Subcommittee on Energy and Subcommittee Oversights Committee on Science, Space, and Tech, says on February 15th of 2017 that the LPO portfolio has over 30 jobs in 30 projects in 18 states. The same piece of evidence goes on to say, quote, that these loan guarantees have created 56,000 American jobs across our country, and that these loan guarantees have helped prevent the release of 34.1 million tons of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere, unquote. Now, this deals with two specific points. First is of 50 billion versus 2 billion. 50 billion versus 2 billion. Now, we recognize that my opponent did refute the fact that there was an internal tax revenue inside of this case, but that was only $2 billion. What he didn't look at was our specific piece of evidence that was talking about the $50 billion in revenue. The $50 billion in revenue. Lexi Jackson, who I read before, I would just to requote this again, says that LPO projects, which is the same one that they were talking about, the same 30 projects over 18 states, have contributed and saved over 56,000 American jobs across all regions of the country and have generated $50 billion in total project investment, unquote. We can clearly see that this system is working. And even if we do get rid of the $2 billion in interest payments, the $50 billion in revenue still stands. The next point I would like to talk about is a contradiction in evidence. A contradiction of evidence. And this is exactly why the negative team's numbers on jobs actually count. See, they brought up a piece of evidence from 2011 that says that LPO projects, the 30 projects that the negative team is still referencing for, has only created 593 jobs. A lot has happened in the past 8 years. We innovated. That's what allowed us to create more jobs, and we created 56,000 jobs, not 563. Our evidence is from 2009 by Lexi Jackson, but their evidence is from 2011. We have more recent numbers, more substantial evidence, and an actual count by the Loan Protection Office. The next point I would like to talk about is a dropped argument, rather, because the affirmative team hasn't really addressed a huge argument that Haley and I are making. We address the fact that their policy affects the environment as well. By the affirmative team only looking at the economic benefits of this plan, they are extremely narrow-minded. We need to be specifically focusing on all fields of advantages. And another field that Haley and I brought up was the environment. Oil spills cause massive amounts of crime, massive amounts of environmental downfall. But also in my speech, I talked about how the loan protection program, which is encouraging energy companies to use alternative energy, has benefited because they were able to use alternative energy sources that lowered emissions over time. This specific piece of legislature that the affirmative team is trying to get rid of is one that is beneficial to our society. But another point that I'd like to talk about is a rather interesting point because it was brought up a little bit in his last speech. We talked about smaller businesses. And I don't believe this was a point that was actually adequately refuted against. Now, I brought up in my last speech that we are getting rid of the affirmative team's plan, and their mandate says immediately. So this means that if we pass the affirmative team's plan, all loan guarantees will end. And the reason why I brought up the argument of a crutch is because these small businesses have no way to actually compete against bigger companies. These small businesses have no actual way to compete against bigger companies. These loan guarantees are providing these companies another chance against the memento mori that is the ruthless economic jungle. By passing the affirmative team's plan, we are suffering. Private investors will not be willing to invest because they're unable and unwilling, but that this system intentionally and willingly sacrifices smaller businesses in our economy in order to achieve one small advantage. That small advantage is not worth it with the many net disadvantages that Haley has talked about. Now, I want to close with an interesting quote. Or not a quote, rather an idea. Remember this marathon runner. That is our current status quo. If he doesn't supplement himself, he doesn't eat right, and he doesn't work out, he's not going to make the 26-mile mark and will probably hit the wall around the 20-mile mark. Thank you. And it's been such a pleasure speaking for you today.
Again, my name is Benjamin Clinesmith, your first affirmative. I'm starting affirmative prep time at 5 minutes remaining. Alright, my name is Benjamin Clinesmith. I'm stopping affirmative prep time at 1 minute and 47 seconds remaining. And if everyone can hear me alright, I'll get into it. I would say that the affirmative case has been largely misunderstood in this round. And throughout this entire round, the negative team has brought up a lot of arguments, a lot of evidence, and a lot of significance. But little, if any of it, is in regard to the affirmative case. The reason for this is because I see this whole situation as loans and loan guarantees passing in the night. Loans and loan guarantees passing in the night. And what I mean by this is the difference between the two. Now, as we understand, the affirmative case is to end the giving out of loan guarantees, to end the Department of Energy's loan guarantees. The Department of Energy will no longer tell a company that we will co-sign your loan, and if you fail, we will pay off your loan. That is the only thing that a loan guarantee does. Pays off a company's loan if they go bankrupt. That's the situation. And loans and loan guarantees seem to be passing in the night because the negative team has brought up numerous, extremely significant arguments, which only regard loans. These arguments are only in regard to loans, and I'll begin my responses upon that basis. First, I'll begin responding to Haley's speech in the 2NC. She said that Congressman VC, and quoted him, said essentially that loan guarantees launched the photovoltaic solar cell industry. Loan guarantees, in fact, launch nothing. Loan guarantees do only this. They only tell the company that we will co-sign your loan and pay off your loan if you fail. That cannot launch an industry. If a company fails, they have nothing to do with the launching of an industry. A loan, on the other hand, can tell a company, we will give you this capital and help you get going, help you launch your business, and you will pay it back with interest. That is economically responsible, and that actually helps the companies. It cannot launch an industry because, for one thing, loan guarantees remove the incentive to innovate, as we stated in our first speech. Loan guarantees tell the company, you have no risk if you fail. Therefore, they have little incentive to innovate. They have their company and they can do what they like with it, but they have removed the incentive of the free market. So loan guarantees not only affect the company in that way, but they cannot launch anything, they cannot help anything, they cannot help a big, cannot help a small business, because they only pay the company's loan off if they fail. That is the only thing loan guarantees do. However, loans, we all understand what loans are. Loan guarantees are the guaranteeing of a loan. All right, let's move on to a second response from to Haley Tyson's speech, and I will kind of cover the entire environmental topic in this. She said essentially that the environment is better with alternative energy, that the affirmative team would hurt the alternative energy market, that workers were harmed by coal mining, by oil spills, that abolishing loan guarantees will also lead to foreign dependence. But in regard to the environmental subject, in regard to the environmental area being harmed by repealing loan guarantees, we cannot hurt any industry. No industry, no company is harmed by bankrupt renewable energy companies. And that's the only thing that loan guarantees have anything to do with. Is the environment better with alternative energy? Yes. And loans help the companies to become successful, help them to capitalize. And we are moving to $28 billion of loan guarantee authority, that is available money, from the DOE loan guarantee program to the DOE loan program. Therefore, we will help the environment become better, become capitalized. Give these companies loans, make them available for alternative energy development, and the government will see a profit in interest, as we've seen in many illustrations, but the government sees no profit, no benefit, only fiscal irresponsibility in a loan guarantee program. And with that, with response to the environmental subject, I'll move to foreign dependence. Abolishing loan guarantees leading to foreign dependence, that is not at all. It will make us more innovative, and loan guarantees are unrelated to live companies. If we abolish loan guarantees, we tell companies, you do not have this wheelchair until you are 12 years old. You have the free market. You have this loan. We will give you capital. Now make a successful product and sell that product. Don't come to us, don't come to the government saying that we want you to remove all of our risk because we're so risky. No company deserves to have no risk because they are so risky. This is in regard to loan guarantees. Thank you very much.
The negative team will be using the remainder of their prep, which is 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Starting now. Okay, I'm starting my 5 minutes for the last negative speech. Okay, starting timer. So the first thing I want to talk about today is that you need to imagine this. Imagine a kid with 2 broken legs and not giving him a crutch. This is basically what the Affirmative's plan is doing. Now, before I dive into the other arguments in my speech, I'm going to be responding to the affirmative team's arguments. The first argument that I want to respond to is that they brought up the point between loan guarantees and loans passing. Now, the negative team agrees, but from the beginning of this round, we are referring to 30 projects by the LOP, which Edward Clark actually agreed that were the loan guarantees. Now, the second argument I like to respond to is that in response to the loan guarantees, there is a small incentive. For small businesses, they are only incentive. Now, they give them a way of a memento mori that would capsize and ruin their companies. So basically, the small companies are going to be ruined because of the loan guarantees if they are not there. Now, the third argument I'd like to respond to is that foreign independence. Foreign independence. Now, there's actually no evidence that they have to deny this. We had proof that we'll rely on the foreign oil by the OPEC. Again, we had proof that we will rely on the foreign oil by the OPEC. Now, I'd like to talk about the dropped arguments. The first dropped argument is that their evidence only talks about taxes, where the negative team's evidence actually addresses the environment as well. Now, the second dropped argument is the economic industry. Now, the affirmative team never said how smaller businesses are going to be affected, and the negative team brought up specific evidence that the private sector isn't going to fund them, only the government is. Now, the third dropped argument is we agreed that the LPO in Cross X is in fact 30 loaned projects across the United States, meaning 18 states are having 30 loan projects happen currently. And all of our evidence for the economy and economic growth help prove that. Now, the fourth dropped issue is the environment. The environment. Now, they, again, brought up no evidence against the environment, and we have proof that the environment will be affected, and they had no counterclaim. They also said that I needed more evidence for the oil spills, when in fact I brought it up and made a pretty great point when I was listing all my disadvantages. But I'm going to be responding to this one again. Environmental harms, which the F never responded to, the oil spills. Now, the Union of Concerned Scientists say on August 30, 2016, state that in 2010, an explosion at the Deepwater Horizon offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico killed 11 workers and led to the release of approximately 4.9 million barrels of oil over 87 days. The accident was unique in terms of its scale, but environmental and safety incidences are common in the offshore oil and gas industries. Between 2008 and 2012, offshore drilling rigs experienced 34 fatalities, 1,436 injuries, and 60 oil spills of more than 50 barrels each. Now, again, this is a big economic environmental harm, and again, the AFF never responded to this point. And one of the biggest things, judges, that I want you to take away is that there are significant environmental harms that would happen by ending the loans. Now, we can see that the impact from this is that oil drilling in the ocean leads to oil spills in the ocean. Oil drilling in the ocean leads to oil spills in the ocean. And according to this piece of evidence that I just specifically read, in just 4 years, there were 60 oil spills, or there were 15 per year. Now, the affirmative team never actually, again, responded to our environmental issues. They only responded to the economy issues. And I would ask that they don't respond to this point now because they've had a numerous amount of times to respond to this in their earlier speeches. Also, they had no counterclaim evidence against the foreign independence. Now, the very last issue that I'd like to talk about were the net benefits. Net benefits. None of my disadvantages were adequately responded to. We, as a negative team, have proved that passing the affirmative team's plan provides much more disadvantages than advantages. Again, we have proved that there are more disadvantages to ending the loans than advantages. These harms are economic and environment, and harms the U.S. all over. Now, I've listed a variety of disadvantages that the economy would have, and what disadvantages are there to this plan. So thank you, and thank you, and this is why I stand for a negative ballot. And thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking for you guys today.
No preparation time is necessary at this juncture. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started, assuming everybody's ready. As we go throughout this entire speech, I want you to remember one little sentence. Little Tony runs a marathon. That's right. Remember that sentence because we'll get back to it in the third of my 3 voting issues. Today in this, the last affirmative speech and the last speech of the round, what I'll be doing is providing 3 voting issues. And in doing so, I will also be responding. Actually, no. Let me first respond to that last speech. Now, pretty much the entire last speech was talking about the adverse effects that our plan will have on the environment and stating that we dropped all these arguments. However, my partner didn't drop these arguments in the last speech. He actually responded to them, and this is the response. Ultimately, when we look at this, we find that the negative is assuming something very drastic. They're assuming that if we end the loan guarantee program, that it will have disastrous effects on all of the United States renewable energy. But when we look at the evidence, we find they've provided no evidence that states that. If we take $24 billion that is in loan guarantee authority and transfer it to a loan authority, to loan programs, we will still be able to help these renewable energy companies, but we will be doing it in a way that has proven economic success based on the negative's own evidence. The reason we decided that we didn't need to spend much time in addressing all the environmental harms is because the negative never truly proved that those environmental detrimental effects would occur if we passed our plan. They just said if renewable energy ceased or if we lost our renewable energy. We agree, renewable energy is great and it helps us stay away from foreign oil dependence. It helps us stay away from offshore drilling. But the fact is, the negative never actually showed how passing our plan will directly obliterate United States renewable energy production. There is absolutely no correlation. They provided no evidence to this fact. Thus, none of their disadvantages stand because we will still be providing aid. That's actually the first voting issue in today's debate round, that of government aid. Government aid. And we'll be examining 2 subpoints under this. The first is that of existing aid. When we look at the current system, we see, and even when we look at our mandate, we find that we are not completely pulling the rug out from all these renewable energy companies that already have loan guarantees. If the government has already vouched for a company, has already given them a loan guarantee, we would be acting illegally if we were to remove those loan guarantees. Thus, that is not what the affirmative plan proposes. If you look at our mandate, it says specifically, cancel all remaining Department of Energy loan guarantee authority. That means authority that has not yet been vouched. So any current aid that is there, we are not going to end, meaning that we will still be fulfilling our contractual obligations. These small businesses that are relying on their loan guarantees will still be able to rely on their current loan guarantees. We are simply ending future loan guarantees, which brings us to our second subpoint, that of loans. Loans. The affirmative team is actually taking $24 billion and making it available in loan authority because we have seen proven success records of the loan program. The government will still be aiding where it's truly necessary, but we will stop this fiscally irresponsible loan guarantee program. This brings us to the second voting issue, that of no economic benefits. No economic benefits. The affirmative claims that there are all these the negative claims there are all these economic benefits that comes from the loan guarantee program. However, when we look at those benefits, we find them to be negligible at best. Once again, that number of 56,000 jobs that have been created, those were the entirety of the jobs, permanent and temporary jobs. Once again, when we look at the loan program office, the amount of permanent jobs created was 593. 593 jobs at the price of $2.2 billion taxpayer dollars. This is not an economically wise system, which brings us to the third and final voting issue, that of Tony runs a marathon. Tony runs a marathon. There have been 2 analogies that have been going on throughout this entire debate round, that of little Tony, who's been impaired ever since he was 14 months old because his parents decided to put him in a wheelchair when it wasn't necessary, and that of a marathon runner needing to be strong. Well, it is our contention today as the affirmative team that a good company must be like a marathon runner. They have to train, they have to work, they have to innovate. And one point that the negative has failed to respond to this entire debate round is that this program actually harms the company's innovation because it indicates they do not need to be competitive. It gives them that wheelchair. This is something the negative hasn't responded to. What this means is even if there was a 0% default rate on loan guarantees, if it didn't cost taxpayers anything, it would still be a bad policy because it harms the very companies it's intended to help. So when we look at the net benefits, we see that there are vastly more benefits to passing this program, enabling more loans, beneficial loans to be given out, and ending harmful loan guarantees. Thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking for you today.
Thank you so much for judging today and for giving us your time, and for everyone
thanks.
watching. Thank you so much.